Hi there, welcome to this third lecture on the Odyssey. My name is Laurence, and today we're going to be talking about books 5 to 8. So that is Odysseus with Calypso and then with the Phaeacians. So that is Calypso of the Plaited Tresses by the 20th century artist Jan Steiker. Beautiful nymph and sex goddess. She is the daughter of Atlas, the titan who is holding up the world, and she rescued Odysseus after he was shipwrecked. So he owes her his life, and as I'm sure you can imagine, she has been an absolute favourite subject of male artists over the centuries. Calypso keeps Odysseus on her island of Ogygia for 7 years against his will. He even refuses her offer of being made immortal and ageless. It's actually quite funny. I remember at university, one of my lecturers told me that he was reading a scholiast on the book 5 of the Odyssey. So scholiast, these would often be, they were scholars essentially who commentated old manuscripts of the Odyssey and other works. And this scholiast, when Odysseus says, "Oh, I don't want to be made immortal and ageless and to spend my life here with you," the scholiast writes, "What are you doing, Odysseus? Don't be stupid. Stay with the gorgeous goddess and never die. Life is awful. Stay with her." Anyway, he doesn't, and that's why we have the epic. So Odysseus' name means concealer, and she was very likely a Homeric invention. Yep, Homer needed a way of keeping Odysseus concealed somewhere while his son Telemachus grew up into a teenager on the verge of manhood, as talked about in the last lecture. So Odysseus may never take to Calypso. In fact, there's a famous quote, "Cold lover, ardent lady." But he certainly does have his fun with her. So the Greek poet Hesiod tells us in his Theogony, which recounts the origins of the gods and their lineages, that Odysseus had 2 sons by Calypso, and the fact he rejects her seductive offer of being made immortal and ageless so long as he lives with her is because of his longing for Kleos, okay, for that account of his heroic deeds after his death. Now, we like to think of the Odyssey as being about a man wanting to return home to his beloved wife, though Odysseus spends a little too much time sleeping with beautiful goddesses for such a straightforward reading. It is also worth mentioning, though, that the rules surrounding illicit, extramarital affairs were a bit different when the person involved was goddess and not a mortal woman. Lucian, the excellent 2nd century AD Syrian satirist, best known for his true stories. He has Odysseus write to Calypso after his death, saying that he regrets having spurned her offer and he promises to return to her. So that's Odysseus writing from the underworld. So after the Olympian gods hold a council, Calypso is ordered to release Odysseus. She therefore gives him tools with which to make a raft. Calypso is a nymph. She is an inferior goddess, sometimes called a demi-goddess, and this means she has to obey the will of the Olympian gods. The Olympian gods have to obey Zeus, king of the gods. Even Zeus has to obey the Fates. Yep, the 3 women. Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. Now, in the case of Odysseus, it is Zeus himself who resolves that Calypso must free Odysseus so that he can see the day of his homecoming. Of course, Odysseus' patron goddess is Athene, and she is the daughter of Zeus. So Zeus is more willing to lend her an ear than perhaps some of the other gods. Anyway, moving on to book 6 of the Odyssey, Odysseus and Nausicaa. So Zeus describes Sherry, as sometimes called Scheria, as the rich country of the Phaeacians who are close to the gods, and he prophesies that they will bring Odysseus back to Ithaca. So remember, by this point, Odysseus has already had all his adventures with the Cyclops, etc., which we'll be talking about later on in the course. Now, Odysseus sets off on his raft from Ogygia, Calypso's island, but as keeps happening, Poseidon wrecks it. Poseidon is Odysseus' arch enemy, and Odysseus barely makes it alive to Sherry, where he sleeps under a bush, and then he is discovered the next morning by Princess Nausicaa, and he has to conceal his manhood using a leafy bough. So he's actually discovered by Nausicaa and her waiting women, and there is a famous painting of this moment, the muscular Odysseus in the bottom right there with a bough that really magically wraps right around his thighs, and as is normally the case with Renaissance paintings, all the busted women are unnecessarily bursting out of their dresses, but there you go. Now, Nausicaa represents another temptation for Odysseus, just like Calypso did, and Homer regularly emphasizes her beauty and that she is of marriageable age. I mentioned in the last lecture that he so often mentions the story of Orestes avenging his father by killing his unfaithful mother and her lover, that Homer mentions it so much you cannot miss it, and in my opinion he really is too much to the point, and you could almost criticize this lack of subtlety. Well, the same is true of Nausicaa. Constant talk about how she is of marriageable age. You just cannot miss what Homer wants to say. So here's a nice epic simile about Nausicaa. She looks like Artemis the archeress, coming down from the mountain along the high ridge of Taygetus or Erymanthus for the joy of chasing the wild boar or the nimble deer. And the nymphs of the countryside, daughters of aegis-bearing Zeus, join with her in the sport. And her mother Leto's heart is gladdened, because she is a head taller than any of them. And even though all are beautiful, there is no question which is she. So did this young girl stand out among her maidens. So, nice epic simile to emphasize her beauty. Artemis is a favourite goddess for Homer to compare beautiful women to. Of course, she's the virgin huntress. Suitable on this occasion because Nausicaa is unmarried and so presumably a virgin. We're going to talk more about women in the Odyssey at a later date. So moving on now to Sherry itself, the utopic land of the Phaeacians. It is very possibly the oldest utopia in world literature. Now, the term utopia, it means nowhere, and it was coined by Thomas More. Utopia was the title of his 1516 socio-political satire written in Latin. So, a few utopic elements of this island. The King Alcina's palace has century statues of silver dogs made by Hephaestus himself. Hephaestus is the lame blacksmith god who is married to Aphrodite, and he makes Achilles' shield and also Aeneas. Also in Alcina's palace, there are 50 women who work weaving beautiful yellow clothing. So purple was the most expensive dye in the Greco-Roman world. That's because it was made from a sea snail secretion, and the process of extracting the dye was extremely time consuming and used up lots of water. So that was why it was so expensive. Yes, in the ancient world, they often call purple Tyrian purple or imperial purple. This is where the English saying to be born in the purple comes from. It means you're an aristocrat. Roman senators wore purple robes. There were also bishops had purple as part of their official clothing. So it was very much a colour present among historically powerful groups. And a final, well, not a final, but the final example I've given here, final two examples. The Phaeacians have no enemies and know no war, and even their ships are self-navigating. So two really good utopic elements of their country. And because the Phaeacians know no war, Nausicaa actually scolds her maids for being afraid of the naked Odysseus, who is compared to a lion in an epic simile. She says they have no reason to be afraid because the Phaeacians have absolutely no foes. Yep, they know no war. And self-navigating ships, well, that is obviously a somewhat magical element, shows that they are loved by the gods. There is Odysseus at the court of Alcinous. No sight of the silver sentries there. Of course, it wouldn't have been in the court itself. The sentry statues would have been outside the courtroom. So Homer writes about sherry and the Phaeacians that their fruit never fails nor runs short, winter and summer alike. It comes at all seasons of the year, and there is never a time when the west wind's breath is not assisting. So that pear after pear, apple after apple, cluster on cluster of grapes, and fig upon fig are always coming to perfection. Utopic indeed. Now, the ancient geographer Strabo, best known geographer from the Greco-Roman world, he located sherry and also Ogygia in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But the 5th century BC historian Thucydides and most modern commentators identify sherry with Corfu, at least in terms of its geographical location. So Corfu is about 110 kilometers from Ithaca. Now, with that quote about the utopic soil and country of the Phaeacians, move on to the next slide concerning Hesiod and the Golden Age. So Hesiod's work and days, Ergakai Hemerai, is a didactic poem written in dactylic hexameter around 700 BC. So it's one of the oldest works of Greek literature, and Hesiod was believed to be a contemporary of Homer. He is, funnily enough, one of the very few ancient poets whose works have survived in their entirety. Now, you might be wondering why he wrote a didactic poem in dactylic hexameter. It's a good question. We have quite a few examples of this from the ancient Greek world. The best one, ancient Greek and Roman worlds, the best one being Lucretius. So Lucretius was a Roman poet and philosopher. He wrote The Nature of Things, and that is it's written in the epic meter, in dactylic hexameter, and it's all about particle theory. Yep, so he explains that the world consists of particles, essentially. So not a completely new idea. In fact, he was not even the first to come up with that idea. And he writes it in the epic meter. And this is because Homer's poems held so much weight and authority in the Greco-Roman world that even if you were writing non-fiction, to give it that sense of grandeur and authority, you wrote in dactylic hexameter. So, in Hesiod's Works and Days, he talks about the myths of Prometheus and Pandora. Prometheus was the man who gave, well, he was a titan. He gave fire to man, and that allowed man to develop. And for that, he was punished, where an eagle, sometimes it's two eagles, will peck out his innards, and his innards will keep growing back again, and this will carry on for eternity. They thought up good punishments in ancient Greece, like Sisyphus, who has to push the rock to the top of the hill and then it rolls back down just before it gets to the top. So, the myth of Pandora, one of the least understood myths in Greek mythology. Worth a quick word on this. So, the story is, everyone knows it, Pandora is told all the vices of the world are in this box. It's actually not a box, I'll talk about that in a second. And she cannot open it, but she can't resist when you're told you can't do something. What do you want to do? You want to press that big red button they told you not to do. She opens the box, releasing all of the vices. She closes it again, and the only thing left in there is Hope. And then Hope says, "Let me out, because without me, humans really have no chance." There's a lot of problems with this. For one, why was Hope included among all the vices? And is it meant to be that Hope is released so that we have a chance in this world? It's worth noting that the ancient Greek word for hope, elpis, can also mean expectation, including unrealistic expectation. And this is where Nietzsche's famous interpretation of the myth comes from. He writes that hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torment of man. It keeps him ploughing on with projects that are ultimately going to be fruitless, but hope makes him think, oh, it's going to get better. Could say the same about many things, such as troublesome relationships, etc. So yeah, so that's Nietzsche's reading of it, is that elpis, hope, is included in there. As mentioned, if you understand elpis in the sense of unreal expectation anyway, then it very much would belong to the virtues. But yeah, lots of different interpretations of the Pandora myth. It is worth a bit of a glance online just to see what different scholars and philosophers have said about it. I mentioned it's not actually a box, it's actually a pithos. This was a Greek jar, and hence the typical feminist reading of the myth of Pandora, which is the jar represents her vagina, and it's a sexist story about men saying women are the worst thing that ever happened to them. I think reading pithos as vagina is a valid reading. But yeah, just a little sidetrack there about the myth of Pandora, sorry. So what's more relevant to the Odyssey is Hesiod's Myths of the Ages, which is a deteriorationalist story, long word, about the 5 ages of man. So you have the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Heroic Age, and the Iron Age. We live in the Iron Age, obviously. That's the worst of all. It's when men sack cities and love war, where the wicked do the virtuous harm, and there is no hope of justice. Sounds quite familiar. As for the Golden Age, this is what Hesiod writes. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos, when he was reigning in heaven. And they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them, but with legs and arms never failing, they made merry with feasting beyond the reach of all evils. When they died, it was as though they were overcome with sleep, and they had all good things. For the fruitful earth, unforced, bore them fruit abundantly and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things, rich in flocks and loved by the blessed gods. So I have italicized a couple of parts there, which are mentioned almost exactly about Scheria, by Homer. Their land produces fruit all year round. They don't have to work the land, and they are loved by the blessed gods. So we have a golden age on Scheria. It is a true utopia. The implication for Odysseus is obvious. Would he not rather marry Nausicaa of immortal beauty and spend the rest of his days on a utopic island? So this is yet another way Homer wishes to demonstrate Odysseus' self-will and his longing for Kleos, his desire to return home, realise his nostos, and be reunited with his wife and son. And also the whole utopic setting of Sherry and the seduction, the temptation rather, that Nausicaa represents creates dramatic tension for the reader, because during Odysseus' sojourn on Sherry, we have to think, is he not going to just take the easy option, what's also going to be probably the nicer option, and marry Nausicaa and stay here on Sherry? Island fever, it is not an illness you get on a tropical island. It's a biological and anthropological phenomenon that refers to the distinct ways in which island organisms or civilizations evolve/develop. So starting with the biological version, best example, I was watching a David Attenborough nature documentary a long time ago, and it had a specific section on islands, and there's this brilliant bit where there's these two lizards standing or kind of lying next to each other, and an insect walks right past them really, really slowly, and the lizards each make a jump at the insect to eat it, but they're both a whole 3 to 4 seconds late. And it explains, the narration explains that on an island, the animals evolve differently because of the situation of often lots of prey and not many predators. There's a chance that in this case, for instance, just when they spring, even if they do it late, they'll catch something anyway. And so they've not really had to evolve into this really specialized, efficient organism with lots of competition, because they don't have the competition. Another example, better known, would be the dodo had no fear of humans because it had no predators. So it didn't evolve to have fear. Interestingly, I didn't know this till recently, but it wasn't humans who directly caused their, well, they did cause their extinction, but it wasn't through overhunting. It was probably because of the pigs and the macaques they introduced, which then ate the dodos' eggs and competed for the resources on the small island. One more example of biological island fever is the German insult for the British of Inselaffen, which means island monkeys. I think it's a very smart insult, actually. You have to think about this in the context of them experiencing British hooliganism and that sort of behaviour. And basically the term Inselaffen, island monkeys, is to suggest that evolution did not take place at such a quick rate on the British Isles, and that's why we behave like we do. So a slightly more imaginative insult than the Krauts, as the English use for the Germans. Anyway, the anthropological phenomenon of island fever, you might be able to gather from the biological examples given, is also that island civilizations develop differently. What is particularly important is that if the island is isolated, then the civilization has no close enemies. Therefore, they do not need to invest the same amount of time and the same resources into the military. Instead, they can invest all that time and etc. into arts and crafts. Yeah. So here is the textual evidence for the validity of applying the anthropological phenomenon of island fever to the Phaeacians. There is no man on earth, nor ever will be, who would dare to set hostile feet on Phaeacian soil. Remote, we are at the edge of the world and come in contact with no other people. So that's what Nausicaa says to her maids when she's scolding them for being afraid of Odysseus. And again, I've italicized the second half of that quote, emphasizes that they were isolated. Yeah. And what are the proofs of them being more advanced than other civilizations? Well, 50 maids working at the loom. There is great emphasis put on the incredible textiles they weave. The men are, well, they excel in dancing as well and seafaring. And a quote applicable here from Book 6 is that the Phaeacians' extraordinary skill in handling ships at sea is matched by the dexterity of their womenfolk at the loom, for Athene has given them outstanding skill in beautiful crafts and such fine intelligence. So, to understand the Odyssey, you don't need to know about island fever, of course. You just need to recognise that Sherry is this utopic land, and that the easy option for Odysseus would be to marry Nausicaa and stay there. But it's sometimes quite interesting, I think, to know what the historical or anthropological, etc., reasoning is behind a place's description and characterization. So, Phaeacian society has been identified with Minoan Crete. So this is really by modern scholars. Weaving and art in general also flourished on Minoan Crete. And the second part of that final bullet point I'll come to in a moment. First of all, to talk a bit about Minoan civilization. So it flourished from 3100 to 1075 BC and really distinguishes itself through its art, including its earthenware, frescoes and textiles. For a long time, it was said that it was a very peaceful society, and that is, of course, what the island fever phenomenon is all about. No enemies, so put more time and resources into arts and crafts. Now it's a little bit debated how peaceful Minoan society was, but what we can certainly say is that there are really relatively few depictions of warfare in Minoan art, so that does suggest that they were less of a warring society than many inland civilizations were. If you closely read the description of Alcinous and Arete, his wife, whose name means virtue, incidentally, you'll see that Phaeacian society is matrilinear. That has also been attested on Minoan Crete. And the laws on Phaeacia, such as the cross-cousin marriage of Arete and Alcinous, are unusual. So this is why I've written in the third bullet point that the scenes described on Sherry would have been very foreign to a Homer's audience. Yeah, not only because of it being such a utopic place with fruit growing all year round, but also because Odysseus must, for example, supplicate to Arete rather than to her husband. And Homer even writes that Arete settles men's disputes. Remember that Homer's society would have expected women to stay out of iron earshot. So this emphasizes the foreignness of this Phaeacian society. And there we go. There we have an early Minoan bird-shaped vessel. So 3rd millennia BC. And quite beautiful, I think. It's not just your typical pot. This different form is, you find slightly more it's a slightly more abstract representation of a bird, isn't it? And that suggests a higher level, higher stage of advancement in art when they're doing more abstract representations. Okay, final thing let's talk about is the Phaeacian Games. So this is book 8. This is often one of the most difficult books for a modern reader, and that's because they don't know enough about ancient Greek culture, basically. Sports are, of course, huge today. Sport is a political force, especially football in much of the world. Same was true of sports in ancient Greece. Yeah, they were a way of winning renown, of winning kleos, and the whole of Book 8 is dedicated to, or most of Book 8 is dedicated to the Phaeacian Games. So for King Alcinous, it's important that Odysseus appreciates the Phaeacian sporting abilities. And when Odysseus then beats the young men in the discus, the Phaeacians instead show off their dancing skills, leading Odysseus to say, "Lord Alcinous, most illustrious of your people, you claimed just now that your dancers are supreme. Your claim is made good. I marvel at the sight of them." So there were actually various games in the ancient Greek world, a bit like how today we have the Commonwealth Games and European Championships, etc. But obviously it's the Olympic Games that people today know of. They're the ones that have come down to us. So the original Olympic Games were held in the precinct of Zeus at Olympia in honour of him. And they took place once every 4 years, of course, but always in August or September. They were said to commemorate the victory of Pelops. That was a Peloponnesian king, and he was the grandfather of Agamemnon, the husband of Helen. Sorry, not the husband of Helen, husband of Clytemnestra. Yep. And yes, so the Olympic Games were originally said to commemorate Pelops' victory over King Oenomaus in a chariot race, though some traditions hold that Heracles founded the Olympic Games. And they were so prestigious that the Christian scholar and bishop Eusebius, in the 3rd century AD, preserved a catalogue of the winners from the 8th century. So the original contest and the first event was a so-called stadion. That was a 200-meter foot race, but other contests were added between the 8th and 5th centuries BC. It's notable as well that the first event in the Phaeacian Games in Book 8 is a foot race. So some of the other contests which are not practiced anymore in the Olympic Games is a martial art called the Pancration, and there was also a race in full armour, which must have been quite entertaining to watch. The prizes at the original Olympic Games were crowns of wild olive, and the celebration of the games also involved ritual sacrifice and banquets. A couple of depictions here of sports. So boxing was a very common sport in ancient Greek games, a very popular one. And yes, we witness Odysseus throw the discus much further than anyone else on Sherry, and this is a fantastic copy of the original marble sculpture by the great Athenian sculptor Myron. So you don't really need to know too much. Well, let's put it this way. Book 8 is not hugely important in the larger context of the Odyssey, at least not the games part. What's more important is what comes afterwards with the bard singing about Odysseus, and then Odysseus revealing his identity and going on to talk about his travels. However, that's something I talk more about in the seminars. That's where close readings of the text is better. But yeah, good to know a little bit about ancient Greek games and the ancient Olympic games, why they were so important. And then when you read book 8, it all makes a bit more sense. Anyway, I will end the lecture there. So, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. And yep, next time we'll be talking a bit about Odysseus' travels, a bit about women in the Odyssey. Hope you can join. Thank you.